Prime Minister Mark Carney heads to Washington, D.C. tomorrow for the FIFA World Cup draw, but we're going to be watching the sidelines of that event where the Prime Minister will meet with U.S. President Donald Trump. Trade talks, as you know, are still suspended, and now Trump's top trade representative says the U.S. could withdraw entirely from the North American Free Trade Pact. In an interview with a Politico podcast, Jamieson Greer said the president's view is he only wants deals that are a good deal. The reason why we built a review period into USMCA was in case we needed to revise it, review it, or exit it. Now, that review is CUSMA, as we refer to it in Canada, begins after this week's hearings in Washington. Business leaders and trade experts from all three countries are testifying before the U.S. Trade Representative, most in favor of the trade agreement. Among those appearing is Canada's former chief trade negotiator, Steve Verhoeven, and he says the threat to tear up CUSMA is just another negotiating tactic.
Well, I think it's part of the negotiating game. I think they did similar things the first time around. They threatened to tear up NAFTA. That didn't happen. So I think it's posturing before the negotiations really start to intensify. We need to be patient. Now is not a time when we're going to get a very good deal out of the U.S., but I think conditions will improve over time. We still have the exemption, the CUSMA exemption from our perspective, which allows most of our goods to trade duty-free. We hang on to that. We work on those that aren't, steel, aluminum, autos, and others, and just try to do it quietly and professionally.
All right, we're going to start there with the power panel. Shachi Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute. Andrew Thompson is a former Saskatchewan NDP cabinet minister. And here with me in the studio, Michelle Cadario was Deputy Chief of Staff to former Prime Minister Paul Martin, and Tim Powers is a former strategist for Conservative parties. Tim, that statement from Jamieson Greer, the President's view is he only wants deals that are a good deal. He should find whoever negotiated CUSMA and give him a piece of his mind, because he clearly doesn't like this thing. I mean, do you think they're serious, or is this really just more saber rattling?
I think Mr. Verhoeven is right. It's more saber rattling. Look, I know Donald Trump fancies himself as a savant when it comes to global trade and economics, but presidents dating back to Ronald Reagan, are we allowed to mention him without offending anybody, have found this to be a good deal in its various forms for the United States and for Canada. It's hard to imagine they can find a better deal than what they have. And given we saw, 2 weeks ago, domestic concerns in the United States about the cost of goods and services and products, they start messing around with that. I don't know how they're going to get a better arrangement. Mm-hmm. So, the president lives the way the president does. He throws things out, he comes back, he circles around. I think this is another example of that. That doesn't mean we shouldn't prepare. Yeah. It doesn't mean we shouldn't have some kind of counter offensive ready, even if it means going back to advertising and pushing people in the United States to see
that. That might not be a good idea.
Well, I know Uncle Pete will get mad about that, Uncle Pete Hoekstra, but the rest of us have to look at what's good for Canada.
I mean, Michelle, I guess the U.S. can get a better trade deal, if they stick to it in terms of what's better for them. May not be fairer for the continent because they're kind of insisting on capitulation. But what do you make of this noise? Is it just noise? And I wonder what's the value of these hearings if the president's just going to make his decision regardless of what the input is.
Well, first of all, I don't think it came as a surprise to the government what the trade rep said. He kind of said out loud what we've all been muttering about and being worried about for a long time. I think the good thing is that he's actually saying it to an American audience and in front of an American audience. And we're actually getting some people on the record who are saying, not a great idea for the American economy. That is the only thing that is ever going to persuade Donald Trump to do anything, that and his popularity ratings, right? So, I think we're kidding ourselves if we don't think that he wouldn't do it if he thought that it was best for him and best for his legacy as the president that he wants to be. Because he's sure gone and done everything else that he wanted to do. He has there's no line in the sand. There's no norms that he adheres to. And I think we all know that by now. But it's, these arguments are being made now about just how much benefit the CUSMA, the USMCA, is for all three countries, and especially so for the United States right now.
Right. Yeah, Andrew, I just wonder about this. And I know Goldie Hyder is there. I think Flavio Volpe is appearing right now. And they've got to do the work. I just wonder if it matters with this president, right? Facts and evidence don't seem to deter him on things. I mean, what do you make of this latest noise from the administration?
Yeah, I mean, again, what we're seeing, I think, from the Americans is a real conflict on what they're trying to do with the tariff policy. Earlier this week, again, we had President Trump coming out and saying, well, if we get enough money out of the tariffs, we can abolish income tax. Of course, you've got some in the in the Republican Party saying, well, really the objective here is to, destabilize the Chinese economy's growth and to, repatriate growth into the United States. They can't decide what this policy is supposed to deal with. And I think what they're finding increasingly is that muddled messaging, coupled with inflation, caused in part by the tariffs, has put the Republican Party on the ropes. When we see this last week with them taking a 13-point hit in a deep red Republican state like Tennessee in terms of the congressional special election that they barely won, when we see the president's popularity in the toilet, these are things that are going to come home to roost in 2026 in the midterms. And I think they're all starting to look at that. So, this is saber rattling. I think it's also them trying to push forward an ideological position. And let's not forget, there are issues that they still want to address that didn't get across the table last time, not the least of which is dairy.
Yes, and that, I think, will have a lot of people worried in the supply management sector. Shachi, how do you view this one? We saw Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent saying yesterday that even if they lose at the Supreme Court, they can recreate the tariffs they've imposed through other means. So it's tariffs and maybe tearing up CUSMA. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, we all know this is a president who likes to rhetorically, figuratively, and otherwise blow stuff up. He would love to blow up. I mean, this is the same guy who 8 years ago had to be explained, like, why can't we go nuclear? Like, literally nuclear. So, yes, the more he can, create chaos. But also the problem here is ideological. Ideologically, he's been itching to do this for ages. And so that is where the ideology of one Donald J. Trump runs into the governors, the big city mayors, the U.S. chambers of commerce, the industry sectors, leaders who donate, by the way, very heavily to the GOP, many of whom who may well have been known to put on a MAGA hat at one point. So, the extent to which he is going to have to be saved from himself on this front, the extent to which he will revert to Trump of 2016 through to 2020, which is I'll listen to the last person I talk to in the room before I make a decision. But I think Canada, the Canadian government, negotiators, and the team that's poised to deal with this is well prepared to handle the chaos, number one, and number two, to start not just looking at alternatives in Asia or the Emirates or in Europe, but a real focus on Mexico. And, with Mexico, there's something of a green light. Canadians, with the second only to the EU, say that Mexico is the country that we should be pursuing more economic and trade ties with. By the way, that froideur, that elbows up, bloody-minded sentiment among Canadians is still existent, even if we're not necessarily seeing the retaliatory measures from this Prime Minister, and that's fine too. But Canadians are saying, oh, the U.S., no, let's put them at the back of the bus in terms of who we should be trying to pursue, convince, engage, and woo. On the other hand, the vast majority of Canadians have a fairly favorable view of Mexico and look at Mexico as a potentially reliable trading partner. So to the extent that now, we can get Claudia Sheinbaum and her government interested in doing business directly with us, I mean, that is one of the potential reactions, plays, and navigations around it.
Right. So Tim, the trip to D.C. tomorrow is about the FIFA draw. It's. I guess we're all very concerned about whether Canada gets a good draw on FIFA, but I think the bigger concern is on the trade front. Do you think, what are the expectations? How should Mark Carney approach this? You talk to people in government, they're keeping expectations very low, right? They don't expect news. They don't think there's going to be a big meeting. I mean, what's a good outcome tomorrow on this?
Well, you set me up for saying, let's don't get a red card while we're there, David. We don't want to get the red card, or a yellow for that matter. Yeah. Look, I think Carney has to play it like he did, was it the APEC meeting after the big blow-up when Trump lost the plot over whatever it was in that particular day. I think Carney has shown himself to be pretty dexterous when it comes to these informal chats. And maybe his mission, if he has one and he chooses to accept it there, is to just make sure they have a good day together and see where the president really is. I don't think anybody has any expectation, unless they've done a fantastic job of keeping it under the lid, that beyond the draw tomorrow and some humor between the two of them, that's all we're going to get. So I think it's just about building the relationship and reminding the president that, hey, look, we are doing other things. We're not fully dependent on you. And oh, and by the way, I just announced a whole bunch of spending I said I would on defense. So I'm doing some of the things you wanted to, but I wouldn't go there to kiss the ring.
Yeah. Okay. Michelle, your quick thoughts on this, and we got some new numbers from the Angus Reid Institute, I think it's called, that we want to talk about. Just what do you think is a good outcome tomorrow?
Well, I think I agree. You don't know what Trump is actually is showing up, right? And you also don't know what else. If he's looking for a distraction in the world because of something else, it's so many variables that you just have to plan to put your best foot forward. I think that you're right, Tim, about it being another step forward in terms of actually rebasing the relationship, another contact point, reminding Trump that at one point, he thought Mark Carney was somebody he could really deal with, and just kind of hopefully thawing a little bit of the chill that might have descended upon that relationship over the last little while.
Hippocratic oath of do no harm. That's kind of what you got to do with this.